Vanakkam. Good morning. Welcome to the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai's American Center. My name is Kathleen Hosey, and I am the Information Officer. And it is my distinct honor and pleasure today to welcome Dr. Don Thomas, U.S. astronaut, to speak to us in person as well as to our audiences who are joining us via live stream about his journey to space. Today and the whole summer, the U.S. Consulate General here in Chennai has been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. We've done so with a series of lectures, including by Dr. Annadurai last month, and we've also conducted a poster competition for which I'm very happy today. Several of the participants are joining us in person, and we are displaying your beautiful artwork on our flat screen in the American Center. I'm also pleased to be joined by Mr. Ramalingam, who is the CEO of Go4Guru India, whom we have to thank for bringing Dr. Thomas to India to speak to student audiences such as yourselves across this great country. And on that note, I request Mr. Ramalingam to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. It's a really honor. Our Consulate General is here. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Maya, ma'am, Regional Officer, for arranging this wonderful event. It's a really great Dr. Don Thomas here, and he's going to meet around 15,000 students all over South India. He's going to visit Chennai, Coimbatore, Madurai, Trichy, all major cities, also Bangalore and Hyderabad. He'll be here until September 5th. September 6th, he is going back. It's really, that was my dream before 6 years, bringing Dr. Don Thomas here. It's happening today. And also, it's a really honor to celebrate moon landing 50th year celebration with the U.S. Consulate. That's a great opportunity. And also, now these aerospace engineering programs are very popular in America. We took students to Florida Institute of Technology in Miami. So a lot of students, they're interested, and it's a great opportunity. Students, they can ask questions about that to our Don Thomas sir during his visit. We're also conducting a regularly international space science competition every year. And through the competition, we are taking 6 students to USA every year from 2018. This year also, SAR is here to inaugurate the 2020 International Space Science Competition. We are planning to take 6 students this year to NASA. You can see the details in go4guru.com. Go4guru.com, we have the details, so students, you can participate over there, and you can travel over there and meet astronauts, and you can visit Florida Institute of Technology kind of universities to know about the aerospace engineering related courses over there. Again, I thank all the officers for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
And at this time, I would like to invite our Consul General, Robert Burgess, to introduce our chief guest.
Sir, Dr. Thomas, it's an honor to welcome you to the U.S. Consulate here in Chennai. And welcome to all of the audience here at the American Center and online. You know, this, as mentioned, this marks the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And there are only a couple of us here in the room who are old enough to remember the excitement of watching that first step and the reports on a grainy black and white TV, the privilege of staying up late to see that. And the sense of excitement that created in our schoolrooms and really around the world. But the excitement of space continues today and has no less diminished, and in many ways really has grown as more and more students have gotten interested and involved in space. And this summer, we saw on July 22nd the launch of Chandrayaan-2 from India, which is now in lunar orbit, preparing for its mission, landing on the south pole of the moon in early September. We're all looking forward to that and wish success to that mission. I say we're privileged to have Dr. Thomas with us this morning. He's originally from Cleveland in the United States. And after his education, he joined NASA as an engineer working on the space shuttle. He then was selected to be an astronaut, which is a very interesting jump and move. And then flew, as he'll tell you about a little bit later, 4 different space shuttle missions. And then following that, he worked as a scientist designing the experiments for the International Space Station. He worked internationally as a liaison in Russia, assigned to our embassy there for our cooperation with the Russians on space launches. And then he was at Towson University in the Hackerman Institute of Mathematics and Science, where he did, the program included a lot of outreach to elementary, middle school, and high school students. And he's continued that mission and that outreach, and now as a speaker, traveling around the world. This is his 3rd trip to India, that we've had the privilege of speaking with him online before, but a real treat to have you here in person. So welcome, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here. I was in India twice before in Mumbai, but to come down to Chennai and to spend a week, 2 weeks with Go for Guru, visiting different cities and students and schools across your great country, I'm very excited to be here today. So if I could get the clicker coming over here. Thanks so much. So what I want to do is a number of things here. We'll get the presentation up. Yeah, before I talk about my missions, I just want to acknowledge a lot of the amazing space explorers from India here. Does anybody know who this is? Rakesh Sharma, yes. He flew in 1984 aboard the Russian Soyuz T-11 spacecraft and spent some time at the Salyut 7, one of the Russian space stations there. How about this person? Kalpana Chawla, yes. You know her very well. I shared an office with Kalpana for about 6 months. She was in the astronaut class after mine. She always had a beautiful smile on her face, like you see here, and she loved talking about flying. She was always doing this. You know, you're talking about flying all the time. A great, great astronaut, and flew on 2 space shuttle missions. Sunita Williams, right? And she flew on 2 times up to the International Space Station. She spent over a year in space on those 2 missions. And on July 20th, just last month, that was the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk, Sunita and I were together in Wapakoneta, Ohio, and that's where Neil Armstrong was born. So I got to spend a couple of days with Sunita. She's working on her next mission is going to be one of the commercial rockets going up, and maybe next year or so. And I've also heard rumors that she may be the first female on the moon. So the United States is committed to landing astronauts on the moon in 2024. We're going to send 2 astronauts. It's going to be 1 man, 1 woman. And Sunita is one of the more senior experienced astronauts, female astronauts. So she's got a really good shot of being the first female on the moon. What do you think about that? Pretty amazing, right? Yeah. I hope that'll happen. But she's very accomplished space explorer there. These are the Apollo 11 astronauts. You know, this summer we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. You've got Neil Armstrong on the left there, Mike Collins in the center, and Buzz Aldrin on the right. They launched on July 16th on a Saturn V moon rocket, and it's about a 2.5-day trip to the moon. And then Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin transferred to the lunar lander and landed on the moon July 20th. It was probably July 21st over here when they landed but July 20th in the United States. And this is a picture of Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder. He was the second human on the moon. Here's another picture. Most of the pictures on the moon were taken by Neil Armstrong. And they only had one camera, and he had the camera. So this is a picture of Buzz Aldrin. And if you look carefully in the visor of his helmet there, zooming in on it, right in the center of it, there's a little white line. That's Neil Armstrong. That's his reflection. That's one of the best pictures we have of Neil Armstrong on the moon. And that's because he was taking it there. Here's a picture of the lunar lander, Buzz Aldrin, some of the science experiments they set up there. And this is a picture of Neil Armstrong once they returned back inside the lunar lander after their moonwalk. You can see a smile on his face. He looks a little tired. I don't think they slept much the night before, but here they had accomplished the mission. And they were only on the moon. Neil Armstrong spent about 2 hours and 10 minutes on the moon. That was it. They landed on the moon, they got out, they collected rocks, set up the science experiments, they got back inside, and shortly thereafter they blasted off the moon. They really wanted to just get there, do the mission, and get back safely. This is a picture taken from Mike Collins. He stayed in orbit around the moon, and this is as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are lifting off the moon in the lunar module. And Mike Collins took this picture, and he says, "This is everybody I know in the whole world." Because you see Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong coming up in the lunar module, and that little blue dot in the background there is Earth. So he said, this is everybody I know in the universe is right in this picture. And they landed on July 24th in the Pacific Ocean. They got the crew safely back home, and they were in quarantine for 3 weeks, and then they released them, and they did a world tour. I think they visited 30 countries or so over 40 or 50 days just to share the experience. And it wasn't just an American accomplishment. This was a human accomplishment. And when Neil Armstrong said we did this for all mankind, it was for all of us. And I think everybody felt that connection with it. So, and I got to meet Neil Armstrong. I wanted to throw this picture in. He grew up in the state of Ohio. That's where I'm from. That's where Sunita Williams grew up in Ohio as well. And Neil Armstrong was always one of my heroes. So on my third launch, I wrote him a letter and invited him to come down to the Kennedy Space Center to watch the launch. I told him I was one of the Ohio astronauts. He was one of my heroes. He wrote back, said, "I'll be there." And it's like, wow, Neil Armstrong's coming to my launch. I was all excited. And it was the day before the launch itself, NASA management called me up and they said, Mr. Armstrong wanted to meet with me. So this is a picture of Neil Armstrong on the left, his wife Carol, and then that's me and my wife Simona just the day before my launch. And I got to spend about an hour one-on-one with Neil Armstrong. And I flew in space 4 times, as you heard. That was really amazing opportunity. One of the greatest things I've done in my life is spend that hour with Neil Armstrong. It was a really special time. And this is a picture of Neil Armstrong and his wife there watching. And in case you can't tell who's who, there's Neil Armstrong, and that's me at the top of that rocket there lifting off. And having him come down was such a great event for me. So my story starts when I was about 6 years old. We launched the first American astronaut in space back in May of 1961. And in my elementary school in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, they brought all the students to our gymnasium. I sat on the floor, watched a small black and white TV, just a fraction of the size of the screen here today, and I watched the first American launch into space. I was just 6 years old, but I watched that, and as soon as our astronaut had made it to space, I was sitting there saying to myself, I want to do that. So ever since I was a little boy, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to ride a rocket to space. I wanted to experience zero gravity floating around up there. So I always knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't quite sure, well, how do you become an astronaut? You know, we have a lot of people want to do this, but I wasn't sure, like, how do you become an astronaut? I didn't know any of the astronauts at that time, and we only had 7 American astronauts. But the one thing I recognized early on was it was going to be very difficult. There's a lot of competition. Thousands of people apply to be astronauts, and then just a small handful are selected. So I knew as a young boy, my only shot of becoming an astronaut, of making it into space, would have to involve me working hard and doing my best in school every single day. For our students here today, have you ever heard that advice before? Work hard, do your best. Work hard, do your best. You hear it all the times, right? From your teachers, your principals, your parents. And it really is good advice because you never know when something you're learning today is going to help you in the future. So as a young boy, I tried to do my best in math, science, all my subjects, reading, art, history, gym, whatever I worked on, I gave it my best effort. After high school, I went on to college. I got my bachelor's degree in physics, one of the sciences, and that's a minimum degree. You need to become an astronaut, 4-year college degree in math, science, engineering, or the medical field. But again, I knew the competition was going to be tough, so I decided to stay in university, and I got my master's and then my doctorate in engineering. So after 9.5 years of college, I got out. I worked for a company called AT&T Bell Laboratories, doing research work for them on semiconductor electronic devices. And this was in the early 1980s, just about when NASA was starting to launch the space shuttle, so my timing turned out to be perfect on all this. NASA selects new astronauts every 3 or 4 or 5 years. They'll pick a small group of 10, 15, or 20, depending on their needs. And 2 years after I got out of college, NASA put that announcement out there. They're looking for new astronauts. I was all excited. I wrote to them. I got the application form, carefully filled it out, mailed it back in. Guess what happened? They said, no thanks, we don't want you. I was surprised too. But I didn't give up. I decided, well, I'll try again. 2 years later, another astronaut selection. I got another application form, filled it out, sent it in, and then that second time, turned down again. And at this point, I thought, you know, my grandmother and I have the same chance of becoming an astronaut. That chance was 0. I wasn't even getting close in the competition. So I knew I needed to do more to get noticed by NASA. And being an engineer, what I did is I studied the data. I carefully looked at the backgrounds of those people that were successful getting into the astronaut program, and I wanted to see what do they have that I don't have. I met all the requirements, but I'm not getting close. So I carefully studied it, and I learned a few things. The first was most of the astronauts that they were selecting already had some flying experience. It wasn't a requirement to become an astronaut, but it seemed to help a little bit. So I started taking flying lessons, and I got my pilot's license. Most of the astronauts that they were selecting had some parachuting or skydiving experience. Again, it wasn't a requirement, but it seemed to help. So I learned to do that. I taught a university course. That seemed to be experience NASA was looking for. So I worked on those activities, and 3 years later, another astronaut selection. I sent my application in, and this time NASA called me up, and they invited me down to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And out of the thousands of people that apply to be astronauts, NASA will select 100 individuals. They bring you to Houston, and you spend a full week on a very thorough medical exam, and then there's a 1-hour interview. I passed all the medical tests. That all went very well. I went on to the interview, and that went extremely well. And at the end of my week in Houston, I thought, boy, that couldn't have gone any better for me. I went back to my job and just sat there and waited to see did I make it or not. And I was back at my job about a week or so when some of my friends started calling me up from across the United States. They called up and they said, hey, Don, the police have been calling about you. And let me tell you, if the police are ever calling about you, it's either really good or really bad, right? In this case, it was really good. NASA was doing a security background check on me, and they looked into my past. They went and checked all the police records, any city wherever I lived, to see if I'd ever been in trouble with the law. They met with all my former bosses, every company that I worked for. They would go talk to them and say, what kind of worker was Don? Did he show up to work on time? How did he treat the customers? How did he treat the coworkers? And then they went up and down the streets in any neighborhood wherever I lived, talking to the neighbors, asking about me. How did I treat people in the neighborhood? And when I heard this was going on, I thought this is a great sign. NASA couldn't be doing this detailed security check on all 100 people they interviewed. I figured they must have selected their astronauts, and this is the final check to make sure you're good to go before they announce the names. So I was pretty excited, and it was about 3 months later I got the phone call from NASA. They called me up and said, Don, thank you very much for applying. We had a lot of good candidates. We did not select you, but good luck in the future. And I hung up that phone and I was devastated. I thought I had made it in, but here for the third time, NASA turned me down. And I cried for 20 minutes because they broke this little boy's heart that, I had this dream from a young boy, and here NASA for the third time told me, no, we don't want you. So at this point, I thought, it's time to give up on this silly dream of mine, right? I gave it my best effort. I worked hard. I applied 3 times, but NASA just didn't want me. So I decided I would go to bed, get a good night's sleep, and then in the morning when I woke up, I would put together a new plan for my career that did not involve being an astronaut. I went to bed that night. The next morning when I woke up, the very first thought that popped into my head was, I still want to be an astronaut. So I asked myself, are there any more of these little things that I can do to improve my background to make myself a better candidate? And by studying who NASA was selecting and who they weren't selecting, it was clear most of the astronauts they were picking were individuals that were already working at the Johnson Space Center down in Houston. So I quit my job. I drove halfway across the United States, moved to Houston. I got a job as an engineer working on the space shuttle program. I did that for 3 years. Then there was another astronaut selection, number 4. I sent my application in. I got called up for the medical testing and the interviews once again, and that all went very well. And then about 2 months later, I got another phone call from NASA. And this time they called and said, Don, are you still interested in being an astronaut? Because we'd like to offer you the job. I said yes. I hung up the phone, and for the next 10 minutes, I was jumping up and down, yelling and screaming because I knew I made it into the program. I was 35 years old when I got that call, and I started a 4-year training program for my first flight. So the first time I made it to space, I was 39 years old. 39 years old is pretty much an old man, right? No, this is why I love coming to Chennai here. Yeah, you guys are very polite. But some of the careers our students will pick, it will take time to get there. So my lesson, the biggest lesson I've learned in my life is to never give up. Never give up on your dream. Let them turn you down, but don't give up. Look for ways to improve your background, to make yourself a better candidate. It takes hard work, right? This stuff doesn't come easy. You got to work hard. It takes time to get there as well. And you all have dreams for your future, whether you want to be an astronaut, an engineer, an artist, whatever it is that you want to do in your life. Don't ever give up on that dream. Work hard. Again, be patient along the way, and you can accomplish anything you want to in your lifetime, just like I was able to do. And I went from this young boy just dreaming of going into space to getting assigned on 4 space shuttle missions. This is the crew from my last flight, and the last time I was in space was 22 years ago already, aboard Space Shuttle Columbia with these astronauts. And we've got 2 military pilots in the front row with the helmets that help us fly the shuttle. On the left-hand side with the helmet is our commander, Jim Halsell. He was an Air Force test pilot. Our pilot on the mission is on the right-hand side with the helmet. Her name is Susan Still. And Susan was a pretty unique individual. She was only the 2nd woman to pilot the space shuttle. And Susan was one of my country's top Navy fighter pilots. So it was a great opportunity for me to fly with her. In the background, we've got 5 of our science astronauts. We're called mission specialists. Our job is to do the science on board. We do the spacewalks. We work the robotic arm. So we each have our area of specialty on the crew. You probably don't recognize that gentleman on the far right-hand side, but that's the way I used to look 22 years ago before glasses, gray hair, wrinkles, and a few kilograms around the middle here. And no laughing about that. I heard that. There you see the space shuttle on the launch pad. I took this picture the night before my first mission. Went out there about midnight or so. And it was so amazing to stand there right at the base of your space shuttle, all lit up with those bright lights against that pitch black sky. And as I stood there looking up at it, I was a little bit nervous. I had butterflies in my stomach, so a little piece of me was scared. A little piece of me was just uncertain about what I was about to do. But my main emotion was one of great excitement, because I knew 12 hours from where I'm sitting inside, 12 hours from when I'm taking this picture, I'll be sitting inside blasting off. And I almost couldn't believe where I was and what I was about to do. So they bring us out to the launch pad about 3 hours before liftoff. We take a lift up the left-hand side of the picture, and right near the nose of the space shuttle, there's an access arm or a little bridge we walk across to get inside. There I am in my launch suit 3 hours before liftoff. I've taken the elevator up, standing in front of Space Shuttle Columbia there, and they strap us into our seats one at a time. So I'm just out here waiting. When it's my turn, they'll call my name. I'll turn the corner to the left, walk across the access arm, and there you see me at the hatch of the shuttle. Before I climb inside, these two gentlemen in the white suits there will help me put on a parachute. We'll get the helmet on, gloves on, and then I get on my hands and knees, crawl in that white board, go through the round hatch, and get inside where we have people there to help strap us into our seats. We're laying down on our backs for liftoff, and we've got shoulder harnesses and seat belts. They strap us in good and tight because there's a lot of shaking and vibration during launch. You don't want to bounce out of your seat and hurt yourself or damage any equipment, so they strap us in good and tight. Once that's done, they close and seal that side door. Then everybody moves away from us 3.5 miles, like 5 kilometers away. And it gets very quiet inside up until 6 seconds before liftoff. At that point, 3 big engines at the tail of the shuttle start coming up to full power. And then 6 seconds later, we light those big white side rockets called solid rocket boosters. And laying on my back on my seat, I could hear the roar of the engines. I could feel the shaking and vibration going on. And right at the moment of liftoff, I felt a push in my back. And it felt to me just as if somebody had their hand right in the middle of my back and they were just pushing me up into the sky. And that's what the shuttle's doing here, literally pushing us, tossing us up in the air. This picture's taken just 4 seconds after liftoff. We're going about 200 kilometers an hour already. So we don't ease off the launch pad. It's literally boom, and you accelerate faster and faster every second. This picture is taken from a NASA chase plane a few miles away, and we launch right along the coastline of Florida there in southern United States. So all the blue in the background is the Atlantic Ocean. The shuttle itself is a small dot. You can't even see it, but you can see the bright flame from our engines. That's probably 0.5 kilometer long. 2 minutes into the flight, we're about 35 kilometers up in the air. And just after 2 minutes, we're traveling already at a speed of about 4,000 kilometers an hour. And our 2 side rockets have used up their fuel. They separate off to the side, fall back to Earth. We would recover them and reuse them again on another mission. So at this point, at the center of the image, you see the space shuttle. Those 3 white dots you see are our 3 big engines that are burning. Just to the right of it is our big fuel tank, and that's going to take us the rest of the way to space. 8.5 minutes after liftoff, the engine shut down. It's perfectly quiet for a second. Then there's a big kaboom. We fire some explosive bolts, and the space shuttle would separate from that fuel tank. And that fuel tank would just fall back in the atmosphere and burn up like a shooting star. It was the only part of the shuttle we did not reuse. And that would leave us then, with the space shuttle there orbiting the Earth. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space. That was always amazing to me. I bet it took many of you more than 8.5 minutes to get to the Consulate here, right? And then Chennai traffic. And think about that. In 8.5 minutes, you could end up being about 300 kilometers above the Earth. And at this point, we're traveling at a speed of 27,000 kilometers an hour. That's about 7 kilometers a second. So imagine how fast you could get home today if you could go 7 kilometers a second here. Most of you would be home within a second or two. If you live far from the Consulate here, it may take you 3 or 4 seconds to get there. And we go so fast that we orbit the Earth. We go all the way around in only an hour and a half. On 3 of my missions, we had a science module in the back of the payload bay called Space Lab. And once we got to space, we'd open up the hatch, float back there, and work on different science experiments. Very similar to the same type of mission Kalpana Chawla was on with STS-107, and very similar to what we're doing today up on the International Space Station. So we do a lot of science up there, and I just want to tell you about 2 of these experiments. I think everybody's familiar with the shape of a candle flame. It comes up to a point because here on Earth, hot air rises. It's less dense, so it rises. Cold air is heavier and settles down. And it's that hot air rising above a candle flame that draws the flame upward to a point. You put your hand above a candle flame, you feel that hot air coming up. You put your hand below it, it's much cooler. In space without gravity, hot air doesn't rise, and cold air doesn't settle down. So instead of a flame being drawn up to a point in space, a flame in space will burn perfectly round. And what you're looking at in this picture is a little pink droplet of butane fuel. It's like what we have in disposable lighters. And we've set it on fire, and that blue ball or halo you see there is a flame burning. and it'll just float in the air. It'll burn perfectly spherical, burn up all the oxygen around itself, and then go out. So we study things like this. How do fires burn? How do liquids behave? All of them looking into the effects of zero gravity. We also do a lot of biology and life science experiments. I've got a small container here in my hand with a Japanese red-bellied newt, like a salamander in it. It would lay eggs. We'd put the eggs in little chambers and just watch how they grow and develop in zero gravity, looking for anything unusual that may happen when they're growing under those conditions. This is Chaki Mukai. She was the first Japanese woman in space, and I flew with her on my first mission. And in space, you don't walk around like we're used to doing here on Earth. To move around in space, it just takes a little push with your finger, the smallest push, and you go sailing through the air like Superman or Superwoman. And you'll keep sailing until you hit a wall or until you reach out to stop your motion. If you like doing somersaults, you can start flipping in the air. And you go round and round all day until you get tired and you reach out to stop yourself. So what do you think? Does it sound like fun up there? We have a blast. It's a lot of fun floating around in space. Here's Susan, our pilot, on my last flight. And Susan's typing on a laptop computer there. And if you look carefully by her toes, she's got her toes hooked on that vertical gold pole. If she didn't do that with her toes, every time she would hit the keyboard on the computer, what do you think would happen? She'd go bouncing off. It's one of Newton's laws. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But if she just pinches that bar a little bit with her toes, she can stay in place, float in the air, and type on the computer all day long. So space is a really fun, comfortable environment to be in. And in space, there's no up or down. I think we pretty much agree which way is up and which way is down here in Chennai. But in space, there is no up or down. And you know here on Earth, if you stand on your head, all the blood rushes to your head because of gravity. I'm sure you felt the pressure from that. That doesn't happen in space. In space, you go upside down, you feel totally normal. And in space, wherever your head is pointed, that direction is up for you. Wherever your feet are pointed, that's down. So this is a picture of Nancy and Kevin, two of the astronauts on my second flight. Nancy's looking at Kevin there saying, "Hey, Kevin, you're upside down." Well, Kevin's looking right back at her saying, "No, you're upside down." In his little world, she's the one that appears to be upside down. So you never feel like you're upside down in space. It's everybody else in the room. Now in space, we don't have a refrigerator, a freezer, a microwave oven, nothing like that. So most of our food is freeze-dried. Comes in small plastic packages like I'm holding here. To prepare a meal, we bring it over to a food station you see in that image. There's a sharp needle that'll poke into that package. We can inject hot water in there. This dry, hard food will absorb that water, soften up, and after 3 or 4 minutes, it's ready to eat. We would just cut this open with a pair of scissors and eat it with a normal fork or spoon. All the food packages have a little dot of Velcro on them. And after we'd make a meal, we could just Velcro it to ourselves. You float to a window, and maybe you watch the Earth go by, and you have your lunch or dinner right there. How convenient is that? We don't use a dinner plate, because what do you think would happen in space? It's just going to float away. So everything has Velcro. We stick it to ourselves. We can stick it on the wall to keep it from floating off. Drinking in space is a little different up there. We cannot drink out of a normal glass or bottle, because you take a bottle of water, tip it upside down in space, and nothing will happen. Without gravity, it's not going to fall or pour out. So in space, we drink out of foil pouches like I have here. This is a bag of powdered orange juice. We've got powdered lemonade, powdered tea, powdered coffee. We bring it to that food station. Needle pokes in there. We inject the water. You mix up the powder a little bit with your fingers, poke a straw in there, and then just squeeze it into your mouth. Does that remind you of something that may be in your lunch some days? Like a juice bag or juice box? How about Capri Sun? Do you have those here? Like an aluminum bag? In America, we've got some of our drink bags that are made of aluminum just like this. Very familiar for our young students. Okay. In this picture, you see I've got a bag of tropical punch, red juice in it, and I've squeezed it, and some of the juice got away from me. And so what looks like a little red ball in front of my face is a blob of tropical punch. Any liquid in space forms a perfectly round ball. It's from a force we call surface tension. It drives it into a sphere, and it'll just float there right in front of you. And you can go up to it and gobble it up, Our more polite astronauts will take a straw. You could poke it in there, and you'll see that blob get smaller and smaller and smaller and disappear. So here on Earth, we never play with our food, right? How about in space? It's okay. It's okay up there. Sleeping is a little different. The inside of the space shuttle is very small. When it was time to go to bed, we would just take a sleeping bag, attach it to the wall with a few clips. Then you just float up there, slip inside, zip it up, and you go to bed. We wear the dark eye shades because we go around the Earth every hour and a half. And you get 45 minutes of daylight, 45 minutes of nighttime. If you don't want the sun coming in your eyes all the time, you need to wear the eye shades. And you see how our astronaut has his arms crossed across his chest like that. Here on Earth, with gravity, if I totally relax, my arm's going to fall to my side. But in space, if you totally relax, the arms tend to come up and float right in front of you. So can you imagine you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, and the first thing you see are two hands floating in front of your face? Our astronauts are not that brave, so we tuck our arms in like you see. And the real reason we do it, off on the right-hand side of the picture, you see cables and switches, and you don't want your arm in the middle of the night floating over there, bumping a switch, hitting a cable, doing some damage. So we try to get nice and secure like you see here. Now for cleaning up in space, we don't have a shower, we don't have a bathtub, we don't even have a sink like you have in your kitchen or bathroom at home. So when it comes time to clean up, we have some of these drink bags that I showed you, and instead of having powdered juice in these, a few of them will have powdered soap. We can add hot water, mix up a bag of hot soapy water. We'd put it on a washcloth and just give ourselves a sponge bath. For washing our hair, we've got a special shampoo that you see here. It's called No Rinse Shampoo. And this was developed for people in the hospital who can't get out of bed to take a shower. It's very easy to use, doesn't require any water. All you do is squirt some of that shampoo in your hair, you work up a lather, you take a towel and pat it dry, and you're done. I took that picture. I love the bottom line on the bottle. It's a little hard to read, but it says, "For beautifully clean, full-bodied hair." And I want to share with you what that looks like in space. Right here, that's Susan, our pilot, and anybody with longer hair, it's going to float all over. I'm not picking on Susan here. Even my short hair floats all over. We say that every day in space is a bad hair day, and that's pretty accurate. I wanted to share with you the granddaddy of all bad hair days in space. Are you ready for this one? Are you sure? You better hold on. Right there. This is Marsha Ivins. She flew on 5 space shuttle missions, had really long hair. She wouldn't leave it like this normally during the mission. Otherwise, for the rest of us, it'd be like scuba diving through seaweed. She'd put it in a ponytail, but just did this for the picture. Exercise is really important in space. As I stand up here today, I'm using my leg muscles to walk around to fight gravity, but in space, it's a little push with my finger, and I just sail through the air. And everything is weightless in space. I lift a car with one finger up there. So we don't use our muscles at all, and it's very important exercise. So we had this bicycle we'd ride every day for about 45 minutes. Get your heart muscle going, get your leg muscles working, so when you come back to Earth at the end of the mission, you're still in good shape. This is our toilet on board the space shuttle. It's like very similar to an airline toilet in a small closet area. We have a curtain that goes across the front, like a shower curtain for privacy. And right at the center of the picture, you'll see a white toilet seat. But here on Earth, we use gravity to collect the waste material. You can imagine what would happen in space. We're not going to talk about that here today. But this toilet is like a porta potty or a portaloo. You may see at a construction site. And in the bowl of the toilet, we have giant fans. And to activate the toilet, there's a little white knob off to the side. You push it forward. It activates the fans, and it sucks air from the toilet seat downward. So we use that down rush of air to act like gravity to keep all the waste material down. And in space, everything floats. If you're brushing your teeth, you want to rinse out your mouth, you can let go of your toothbrush and toothpaste, float across the shuttle, get a drink of water. When you come back, they should be floating in the air right where you let go of them. I want to wrap it up by showing you some pictures of the Earth. And whenever an astronaut has a free moment, we would float to the window to watch the Earth go by. I've got a map in my hand there. I'm trying to figure out where we are around planet Earth. And I'm looking out one of the windows towards the tail end of the shuttle. And I took a camera right up to that window, pressed it against the glass, and I took a picture so you can see exactly what my eyes are seeing. And this is the view I see out the back. So that's a beautiful blue Earth from 200 miles up. All the blue in the background you see there is the Pacific Ocean. The white areas are puffy clouds. That peninsula coming down is Baja California. It's part of Mexico. And the most impressive thing in this picture to me is if you look at the bottom edge of the Earth, either to the right or to the left of the space shuttle, you'll see a very thin blue line. Can you see that here today? That blue line is our atmosphere. Okay, on a nice sunny day like we have today in Chennai, you look up at that blue sky, it looks like it goes on forever and ever. From space, we see our atmosphere edge on. And it appears, just as you see in this image, it looks like a paper-thin layer. Most of the air protecting us here on planet Earth is in that first 30 kilometers or so, and that's about it, which is why when we pollute the air, it can have such a major impact on our planet. Here's a big hurricane or typhoon. This was over the Pacific Ocean. This was a big one, about 600 kilometers across. And we flew right over the center of the storm. Anybody know what that's called? The eye, right? And from 300 kilometers up, I could go to the window, look straight down, look right into the eye, and see the blue water of the Pacific Ocean. The next picture will show you the eye looking straight into it from directly overhead, right there. That's maybe 30 kilometers across or so. And this one had top speeds, wind speeds of like 200 kilometers an hour. Here's a volcano venting steam. This is in the South Pacific near Indonesia. And here you see the Himalaya mountains. And right at the very center of the picture is Mount Everest. And I've seen the top of Mount Everest with my own eyes about 25 times during my missions. I call it the lazy man's way to see the top of Mount Everest, right? No climbing involved, just looking out the window as I drink my juice. But I use this picture to illustrate some of the things I got to see and do during my career. I've never climbed Mount Everest. I never will in my lifetime, but I've seen the top of it with my own eyes many times. I've seen the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. I've seen the Amazon rainforest that's in the news a lot right now in Brazil, South America. I've seen Mount Kilimanjaro, big volcanic peak in Africa poking up through the clouds. So many amazing sights around planet Earth. Does anybody recognize this beautiful part of planet Earth? Chennai, exactly right, yeah. So you see Chennai there, some of the landmarks, just beautiful. And your beautiful beaches there, right? You can see them from space. There's Pulakat, another image from this area. And this looks like maybe like a broken window, but this is Chennai at nighttime. And you see all those lights in Chennai? Do you know what those are from? That's all of our students staying up late studying, right? Everybody's nodding their head, yes, that's exactly right. But that's your beautiful city there. And you can actually see the international airport. You know, the runways there, it's a darker area with less lights. Here's a sunrise from space. Because we go around the Earth every hour and a half, we see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24-hour day up there. At the end of the mission, it's time to come home. We fire 2 engines in the back of the space shuttle. It slows our speed down just a few hundred kilometers an hour, but that's sufficient for the space shuttle to begin falling back to Earth. And about an hour later, we would end up landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Touching down like an airplane, we'd deploy that drag parachute out the back to help slow us down. And then we just put the brakes on, roll to a stop, and we just sit there and wait for them to open the hatch so we can get out. And when you first come back from space, you feel like you weigh about 1,000 kilograms because you've been floating around weightless for 2 weeks, and then suddenly you come back to this pull of gravity. The normal pull we all feel in here today, but it felt so heavy for me. My arms were heavy, my legs were heavy. I was a little dizzy when I got back. And it took a day or so for that dizziness to go away, and maybe a week or so to get your muscle strength back, and then you're pretty much back to normal. So this picture was taken 2 hours after I landed on my first flight, and I'm standing there on the left-hand side. After we took this picture, I turned around and I was looking back at Space Shuttle Columbia and just staring up at it, and I thought, what an amazing vehicle this space shuttle is. You know, this was my house in space for 2 weeks. This thing protected me from that fiery reentry coming in through the atmosphere. And then one of the next thoughts that popped into my head was, I got to do this again. And it's like going on a great roller coaster ride. If you've ever done that, sometimes you'll get off the ride, you run around, get back in line, and do it again. Does anybody else do that, or just me? Yeah. And that's exactly how I felt. As soon as I landed on my first flight, I thought, wow, that was incredible. I got to do that again. And I went on the 4 missions to space. So that is a little bit about living and working in space. Why don't we see if you have any questions, if there's anything you'd like to ask here today. Yes, are we going to bring the microphone around, or I can just repeat it as well?
Yes.
Okay.
We also have questions online, so Kathleen is going to
Okay.
give those questions out.
Good morning, Dr. Thomas. So what was the most challenging task that you did on the Space Lab?
I'll tell you, the most challenging task of being an astronaut is getting all that information into your head. And it was the same thing with all those experiments, learning how to do them. And we're working on more than 100 experiments, and you don't want to make a mistake. If I make a mistake on a math test, maybe I get 95 out of 100, I did pretty good. But if I make a mistake in space, it can kill us, it could ruin the experiment. So the hardest part of being an astronaut overall is just getting all that information in your head, and that's why we train for 4 years before we fly to space the first time. You know, one of the challenges, I showed you the experiment with the Japanese red-bellied newt, and we had them plugged into a life support system to keep oxygen in the water for them so they wouldn't die. And I would have to take out that chamber and take pictures of the little, the eggs that were developing. And that took 15 or 20 minutes. And we had to do that really quickly so I could plug them back in, so none of them died during that. That was one of my challenges. Just I had to practice and practice so I could do it as quick as possible and keep them alive up there.
Yeah. See, nowadays the commercial.
We'll get a microphone here.
I'm Maran from Chennai. We are going to launch a commercial spacecraft. Then in that case, actually, what is the health condition to be needed? Actually, if the person is very old or is a heart patient or someone like that, then
Yeah.
what would be the health condition? There is no hospital there. Then how will you survey if there is any emergency?
Right.
What is the guarantee? That's
Yeah,
all.
we're very close to launching commercial space tourists up to space. The Russians have been doing that to a limited extent. You know, they're charging millions, tens of millions of dollars to do it. But Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic, Elon Musk with SpaceX, and Jeff Bezos with Amazon, they all have commercial companies. And probably later this year or early next year, they'll be launching their first paying customers. So what are the health requirements for them? They're a lot less than the career astronauts. You know, I'm sure they have to pass like a standard physical that you need to get a pilot's license, because nobody wants somebody to go up to space on a fun trip and have a heart attack or some other serious health issues. But they will not, I know they will not be as strict as they are for the astronauts, professional astronauts. So I think every company will have their own set of requirements of what they expect. And, you know, they'll set that limits themselves for that. And based on their experience, I'm sure they'll change those requirements if they have problems with people.
Okay, so we have another question here.
You told that when you went to space, you saw 16 sunrises and sunsets in a day. So when you came back, how did that change your perception of time on Earth?
Yeah, let me tell you, I thought that the sunrises and sunsets in space were the most beautiful thing I'd seen ever in my life. And then I landed back on Earth, and that first night back, I was back home in Houston, Texas, and the sun was setting, and there was a beautiful sunset. The whole sky was lit up with the orange and pink color. And it just made me realize the sunsets here on Earth are really beautiful too. We get used to them. We see them every day. But when you leave the Earth and you come back, then you can appreciate, wow, they're really beautiful here. So two of the things that happen for the astronauts, their perception, that changes when you go to space. The first thing is you view the planet differently. You see this planet as very, very fragile. You see the paper-thin atmosphere, things like that. So every astronaut will come back to Earth and say, oh, we have to take better care of our planet. The second change that happens for every astronaut is how you view your place on the planet. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, I told you. So I would tell people, I'm from Cleveland. That's how I identified myself. Today, if you ask me where I'm from, I'm going to tell you I'm from Earth. And for me, it doesn't matter what city, state, country, Doesn't matter your religion. None of that matters. You know, we are all earthlings here, and all of us have to take better care of this planet because we only have one of these. You know, there may be other planets that are Earth-like out there. We haven't found them yet. We don't know how to get to them. This is the only place that we know of right now that can sustain life. And it's a beautiful, beautiful planet. And we just all have to take better care of it. That's the biggest change, I think, for every astronaut. Whoever stood up here, any of the astronauts that have gone to space, would tell you pretty much the same things.
Thank you, online audience, for your questions. We have Aaron Clark asking on YouTube, is there a chance we can live on Mars in 50 years? And maybe you could also speak to our current Mars missions.
Yeah, we'll be on Mars before 50 years. You know, we have plans today at NASA. We're building a new rocket called the Space Launch System, SLS. And this will be the biggest, most powerful rocket ever built. And we're going to use it, first off, we're going to test it by going to the moon. So 5 years from now, we will have, you know, 2 astronauts walking on the surface of the moon on this new rocket. It also has the capability to send astronauts to Mars. So we think we're maybe 20, 25 years away from launching our first astronauts to land on the surface of Mars. And do you know who those astronauts are going to Mars? I'm too old to go to Mars, okay? 20, 25 years from now, I'm going to be near 90. NASA's not sending me to Mars. The generation, the astronauts going to Mars are the generation of our students here today. You know, we call you the Mars generation. And it will be somebody in your generation to be that first human to set foot on Mars. And when we send that crew to Mars, I'm really hopeful. My dream would be that it's an international crew. And it represents not any one country, not the United States, not China, not India, not Russia, but it represents planet Earth when we send them there. So I would have the hope that maybe one of you have the opportunity to be on a mission like that, maybe to be the first human to set foot on Mars. And if not on that first mission, we will set up a base there and we'll be sending crews back and forth to Mars. Because humans explore. This is what separates us from all the other animals, you know, here on planet Earth. Humans explore. So we're going to go back to the moon, send astronauts there. We're going to go near the South Pole. So your Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft landing near the South Pole is going to really benefit, you know, NASA sending our astronauts there. We can learn a lot about what the South Pole, we have never been there before. And the first time that we go there, September 7th, right? And that's going to be a great success. We're going to learn a lot about that. So these are the types of cooperations that we need to do in space, you know, similar to what we're doing on the International Space Station today.
Hello, sir. My name is Madhuri, and I'm from Bangalore. We all are very fascinated about UFOs. So when you went to space, did you ever feel that, you know, you'd identify a UFO or see a UFO?
Yeah, I don't know if I can talk about that in here, but listen, I will tell you this story, but you have to promise me it stays in this room. And for those online, we don't tell anybody about this, okay? So let me tell you the story. My first mission, the first day in space, I'm looking out the window of the space shuttle. The sky is pitch black, and I notice a light flashing out there. Once a second. It goes flash, flash, flash. So it catches my attention, and I'm watching this object, and I notice it's moving with the space shuttle. I can see city lights like I showed you down on Earth. This is not on Earth. This thing is moving with us. So my first thought was, how lucky am I, Don Thomas, on my first mission, I'm making contact. I watched this thing for about 10 minutes, and I finally realized what I was looking at. And what it was, it turned out to be a big chunk of ice that had come off the back of our space shuttle, and the ice was flipping end over end. And it had a flat side to it, and when the sunlight would hit it, it was like a mirror. So what I thought was an alien turned out to be a piece of ice. Now, I tell you that story because if I had quit looking at it 5 minutes earlier, I would be standing up here telling you a totally different story. Oh yeah, I saw aliens up there signaling me, and then the sun came up and it disappeared. So the astronauts, we see strange things up there. Most of the time, if you study them, you can figure out what you're looking at. I don't know anybody who's seen any other spacecraft, any other life up there. We've been to the moon, no life, no plants, nothing there. We've been rovers on Mars. We have not seen any sign of life. Once again, the only place we know that life exists in the universe is right here, right now. But I do think there's other life out in the universe. With the Hubble Space Telescope, we zoomed in on a small part of the sky about the size of the full moon. And in that one small area of the sky, we discovered there were 15,000 galaxies. Each galaxy has 10 billion stars. We think every star has multiple planets. And these galaxies are evenly distributed. Wherever you look in the sky, day or night, in roughly the area of the full moon, you're probably looking at 15,000 galaxies. So given the billions of galaxies, billions of stars, we think every star has multiple planets like our sun does. I think there's other life out there, but we have not seen it yet. That's one of the major reasons NASA explores. We're looking for life. And maybe some of our future missions will go to some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn that are ice covered, that have liquid water oceans underneath, and their potential areas. Well, let's see if there's any life there. We'd like to know, is life really this unique, or is it common in the rest of the universe?
Sir, we are receiving a few scientific questions to that end. Jaya Kumar asks if you think we can extract helium-3 using current technology from the moon.
I think there is. There's been a number of commercial companies who have talked about setting up a base there. It's just very expensive to do mining operations like that in space. It's very difficult, very expensive to do that. We talk about mining the asteroids as well. Some of them have a lot of, could be gold and platinum and other really expensive elements, but it's still so expensive to go to space that it's not cost effective yet. But once we get our commercial companies involved, and we've got many countries now launching towards the moon, maybe these types of mining operations will be possible for us in the future. That's a really good question.
And Professor Narasimhan also asks via WhatsApp if you could talk about any critical biological experiments in space.
We do a lot of experiments on the astronauts. I didn't talk about those, but the astronauts, we lose our muscle strength in space. We lose our bone density. Our bones get weaker in space. We're also exposed to more radiation up in space. So they do a lot of studies on us. We exercise. I told you to keep your muscle strength strong. Up on the International Space Station, our astronauts exercise 2 to 3 hours a day because they're up there for 6 months at a time. And they also have resistive exercise like weightlifting that they can do. They don't use free weights because it would be simple to lift them with their finger, but they have a weight connected to springs and pulleys, and it's by putting force on your bones, that's what stimulates them to grow. So we've been doing a lot of investigations up in space on the space station the last 15 years at ways to keep our astronauts healthy for our long missions to Mars in the future and then beyond Mars itself.
This is much more of a personal question. What was going through your mind when you saw the Johnson Space Center for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was 14 years old when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and down at the Johnson Space Center is where we have mission control, very famous area. Flight directors like Gene Kranz, who was on Apollo 13, he said failure is not an option. There's a lot of history down there at the Johnson Space Center. So when I was 32 years old, that's when I got my job as an engineer working down at the Johnson Space Center. And I will never forget that first day I drove in. I have my white shirt and a tie on, and I had this huge smile on my face. And I drove right by one of the big Saturn V moon rockets like Neil Armstrong took to the moon. I started showing you the launch of his rocket. They had one of them right at the entrance. And I drove by there. I went through the main gate. I passed through security, and I thought, I'm part of the Johnson Space Center. It was really a memorable day, incredibly memorable day for me, because I was part of that space team. And I worked there as an engineer. You can work at NASA as an accountant, as a lawyer, as a flight controller, working in mission control. These are all great jobs because everybody who works there is part of the team. And every single person working there is really critical to the mission. All kind of different engineers, aerospace and electrical, mechanical engineers, and biologists, chemists. There's just a huge team of people That's the first time anybody ever asked me that question, and it took place right here in Chennai. Thank you for that one.
I am Bhubalan, an educationalist. I want to know what are the skills you introduce in teaching the boys or girls to enter into the profession? What are the special skills required to take up this as an occupation in future?
The special skills of the teachers?
Students, among the students, what are the skills they require to work in the
To be an
space as an
astronaut?
astronaut?
The
What are the
skills that
basic
you-
skills
Yeah.
required? Do you teach that in the college
You
or
know,
schools?
You need very good math and science skills. And NASA doesn't just pick aerospace engineers for the astronauts. They pick a wide range of backgrounds. So we have chemists, biologists. I'm an engineer, materials engineer, dealing with metals. We've got aerospace engineers. We've got veterinarian astronauts who take care of the animals in space. We've got medical doctor astronauts. So the one thing that everybody has in common, they have a very good technical background. It doesn't have to be just aerospace. You know, NASA actually likes a broad technical background, somebody with a little bit of experience, maybe some medical training, and they're an engineer, or an astronomer, and they know a little bit of biology. So those are very important technical skills to have. And then one of the most important skills of being an astronaut is to be good team players, working as a team. We had 7 astronauts on my last mission. I showed you their picture. We all have to work as a team. All of us work together because our lives depend on one another. My life depends on my other 6 astronauts doing their job perfectly. Their lives depend on me doing my job perfectly. And you have to work together as a team. I think our students today in this generation, you get a lot more training working in teams on projects at school and other things like that I didn't do as much when I was a young boy. But it's that teamwork is very, very important in the space industry because no one person can launch a rocket. It takes an incredible team of designers and engineers and astronauts, just a whole team of people making it, and everybody's got to work together on that.
So I would like to know, if you get selected as part of the first manned mission to Mars, what would be the first thing you'd say when you set foot on Mars?
Yeah, I did get asked that question recently, and if I had that opportunity, I would not turn down a trip to Mars. So if somebody asked me to go to Mars, I would definitely go. I think when you get these opportunities in life, never turn them down. When there's a door in front of you, always open it and walk through and see what's there. So if I went to the first person on Mars, I don't know my exact words, but I know it would be very closely connected, and it would be a tribute to Neil Armstrong in his first words. It would be something about a small step, maybe something along those lines, both as a tribute to like a recognizing, the accomplishments of Apollo 50 years ago, and also because Neil Armstrong was such an important factor in my life, one of my heroes growing up. So I know whatever I said, I would work in some reference to small step. Yeah. Did I get to see a black hole? We have never seen a black hole because they don't give off any light. So you don't see a black hole, you just see an area of blackness, or maybe you see stars and dust getting sucked into a black hole. We think that there's a black hole at the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. Of every galaxy has a black hole. There's other ones out there, but we don't get anywhere near them. You don't want to get too close. If you get sucked into a black hole, there's no way of getting out of it, okay? The gravity is so high. If you're standing on a black hole with a flashlight, the light can't even escape the pull of gravity. So black holes are very difficult. When I was your age, we didn't even know there were black holes. That's something that came about when I was in high school, early college years. And, so we have a lot to learn yet about black holes. Yeah.
Sir, you told that you were an engineer. So how did they train you to become an astronaut in 4 years? Like what kind of training and exercises did they tell you to do?
Yeah, let me start with the exercise. There's no rigid exercise program for the astronauts. We have to pass a physical every year. And if we don't pass that physical, we don't fly in space. And that is a great motivation, a great motivator for the astronauts. So I know I got to stay in shape. So NASA doesn't have to tell me to exercise. I just know if I don't do that, I'm not going to fly. So most of the astronauts, a lot of them run. I'm more of a swimmer. I used to swim. Some people bike. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how often you do it. You just have to be able to pass a physical every year. And I heard a story about Neil Armstrong. I don't actually think this is true, but he's quoted as saying, we're only allotted a certain number of heartbeats in life. And he didn't want to waste any of his exercising. Now, I don't think that's true. You know, he wouldn't have been an astronaut had he not exercised and done that. So the exercise, they leave it to us. The rest of the training, it was like 4 years of training for my first flight. And the astronauts spend a lot of time in the classroom, just like you do in your school right now. So we're learning the different systems of the space shuttle or space station. We also train in simulators, models of the space shuttle. So we learn all the switches and dials and computer screens, all the software. We have to learn that because if an engine has to be shut down, you can't be sitting there looking at 1,000 switches and trying to remember where that one is. You have to be able to reach to it very quickly. So we train 4 years, hundreds and hundreds of hours in the simulators. We train underwater, practicing spacewalks. We train in zero-gravity planes that do these parabolas going up and down, and we can get 20 to 30 seconds of zero gravity at a time in those. We also train in jets. We can get high levels of gravity, 7, 8 times the normal force of gravity on us. So we do a wide range of training. All of it is so much fun. I would drive by NASA on the weekend, and when I was training to be an astronaut, I would drive by there on the weekend and say, I can't believe they pay me to do this job, because it was so much fun every single day. It was a really great job.
Hello, sir. See, this request, humble request. See, like you, I also vision to enter into space, at least once in my life. At this age, I cannot travel like you. Now I'm waiting for the commercial thing to come. Till that time, actually, I have a connection with Neil Armstrong and you. That connection from you to me, I want to take one photo to keep in lifetime memory.
Yeah, we'll do that at the end. We'll have time.
Yeah.
Sure.
We'll take 2 more questions and then.
So you had mentioned on the various experiments that you guys do in space. So what is the criteria on which NASA decides what experiments are conducted in space? Because I'm pretty sure there are like millions of experiments that many people want to be conducted in space.
Yeah, there's competitions for that. And I didn't get to select the science that's done on my missions. Somebody at NASA headquarters, somebody's in charge of putting together a group of experiments. Some experiments that we do in space need a lot of the astronauts' time. Other experiments that we take to space, I flip on a switch and a computer will operate it. So they put together a mix of these. If we had all these experiments that needed a lot of the astronaut time, we couldn't schedule all that. So somebody will coordinate that. Some experiments take up a lot of power. When we're growing crystals, melting metals in space, it takes a lot of power to do that. So you got to balance out how much power does it take, how much data is it returning to Earth, and we just balance all those out. And somebody will check that out, put together a plan. We're going to select these experiments. But typically they have a committee at NASA. They're going to put out an announcement. We're going to fly biology experiments, or we're going to fly astronomy experiments, and there'll be a competition for who has the best proposals for that.
You said you do many experiments. So can you share one experiment which you found the most interesting or something?
Yeah, well, my background is an engineer and a materials engineer, so I worked on a lot of crystal growth experiments, but they weren't my favorite experiments. What I found out was most of the experiments that I really like doing involve plants and animals, so that you could interact a little bit, and it reminded me more of planet Earth. We had one experiment. It was a tank of baby jellyfish, and you probably jellyfish kind of squirt like that to swim. And what baby jellyfish will do, they'll squirt to the top of their tank, they open their mouth, and with their mouth wide open and gravity, they fall and they feed. So they squirt to the top, open their mouth, and feed. Squirt to the top, open the mouth, and feed. In space, they would squirt to the top, open their mouth, and just stay there. They have their mouth open. Without gravity, they're not falling. There's no food coming in. And they had to learn new swimming behaviors just to eat in space. So the experiments that we flew, the salamanders, those Japanese red-bellied newts, the jellyfish like that, we flew rats on one of my missions. It was just fun to watch another living thing either grow or see how they adapt and behave up there. So I think most of the astronauts, they would tell you, what's your favorite experiment? It would probably involve plants or animals. And I think part of that is just that fascination with other life. And part of it is that that's a connection with Earth. When I see a goldfish swimming, it reminds me of Earth, and they do funny things up there too in zero gravity. One, few more?
Yeah. Hello, doctor. You said the career shift in your life helped you getting into NASA. What's your advice for the aspiring astronaut for the career path?
For the aspiring astronaut, there's many different career paths that you can take. Like NASA doesn't select astronauts. Like I got selected when I was in my mid-30s. 33, 34 years old is when they select most astronauts. And you're well along your career at that point. I'd already had my PhD, had been working in industry for 6 or 7 years. So what you're trying to do is develop a technical background with different experiences out there that NASA can draw upon and doing things that somehow distinguish you from everybody else, because there's a lot of competition. So that's when I started taking flying lessons and learning to skydive, doing some of these little things that might make me stand out from everybody else. If I was a young student today, I would probably be taking a few courses in geology, lunar geology. You think the moon's of interest? It's a big interest, right? On September 7th. Mars as well. So a little geology for going to Mars. So if I was applying to be an astronaut today, I could tell NASA, hey, I've taken a few courses on geology. I'm interested in rocks. And are astronauts going to the moon? Are astronauts going to Mars or anywhere else? We're going to be collecting samples, and that's always good training. So you just want to look at maybe the mission, what's going on, and look at who they're selecting today. What kind of skill sets do the astronauts have? That's how I got into the program. I was... Those are some of the skill sets that you need going to Mars.
Hello, doctor. Pleasure meeting you today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay. I'm a filmmaker, so I'm working on a couple of projects. Okay, like one of the subject is astronaut based. So, in case if I send you review, could you review my story? Like it's like synopsis or something. Would you be interested?
I'd be happy to take a look at it. Sure.
Yeah, it'd be a great pleasure. I mean, it'd be like
Yeah.
great guidance, because there are certain things, what I have learned. I have seen videos, and based on that, I have created the character and the behavior and the backdrop and everything. Even NASA and all those simulators, whatever, the sequences are all in my story, the way, whatever you have described it.
Yeah, about 600 people, 600 humans have gone to space in the last 50, 60 years here. That's Rakesh Sharma,
Yeah.
Kalpana Chawla, and there's 600 of us. There's not that many people have gone to space, so if I could help you out at all, I'd be willing to do that.
Great.
That's why we try to share this experience. Not everybody has done that. With our commercial rockets, many of you in your lifetime will have an opportunity to go to space. It'll be maybe like taking an exotic vacation to Antarctica. It'll be more accessible.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all very much. It's a great honor for me to be here. This is the beginning. Thank you. This is the beginning of 2 weeks visiting schools across southern India with Go for Guru, and to start it off today at the American Consulate here in Chennai with such great students and other people visiting us. I think it's a great way to kick off the program. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks so much. Thank you, Kathleen.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Don Thomas, you're a hard act to follow. We are going to continue our program for the next 15 minutes. And just to give you a run of the show, I'm going to invite my colleague to say a few words about U.S. higher educational opportunities. We hope that some of you in the audience today would consider studying in the United States. And then I will announce the winners of our U.S. and India Space Exploration Poster Contest. So Maya, if you would please step forward.
As Kathleen said, it's certainly a hard act to follow. I'm very much on Earth, so I'm going to speak to you on very practical aspects. But firstly, a big thank you to Dr. Thomas. It was fascinating to hear about your experiences in space and really, really inspiring to hear about your personal journey and your determination to become an astronaut and to follow your dreams. And that's something I think all of us should aspire for in whatever field that we are in. To all of those students tuned into this event out there and to everybody assembled here, the time to plan your future, as Dr. Thomas said, is right now. He started when you were about 7 years, Dr. Thomas, to plan to become an astronaut. So that's an amazing journey. So with that in mind, and so those of you who wish to follow Dr. Thomas's footsteps, either to become an astronaut or to contribute in some way to space mission, on Earth, there are many obviously different areas that can contribute to a successful space mission. And as Dr. Thomas said, it's not just the aerospace engineering or computer science. Of course, the first thing that comes to our mind is material sciences, physics, computer science, geology, artificial intelligence, and all of these fields, but also nutrition, psychology, and there are all of these different fields that contribute to a successful space mission. But the bottom line for all of this is about hard work, research and innovation. And research and innovation is really the two pillars of US higher education. And I would, and those of you who are looking at studying in the US, I would recommend that you stop by the nearest Education USA center. I work for the Education USA office here in Chennai. We have 7 Education USA centers around India. So please look up our website, educationusa.state.gov, and also look up the Education USA India Facebook page for more information. We come up with a lot of events, a lot of online events, and information on studying in the US on the application process to US universities, which is a good 18 months to 2 years of planning in advance. So it's not like becoming an astronaut, but still you need to start early and work towards that for at least a couple of years. So as you plan your big step, I would recommend that you contact one of the Education USA centers. Education USA is the official source of information on US higher education. It's supported by the US Department of State, and we have a lot of trained advisors at our centers to guide you on applying to US universities. So before we close, I'd also like to add that Education USA's All India Fair is coming to is being held across 10 cities from August 31st to September 12th, 2019. And in Chennai, it is being held on Saturday, September 7th, with about 42 US universities coming to town. So if you take the opportunity to please hop across to Hyatt Regency to meet these 42 universities. And also in Cochin, the fair is being held on Friday, September 6th. So to all those audiences sitting across Kerala and Tamil Nadu, so look up these two fairs. And across India as well, we have the fairs in about 10 cities. So with that, I am actually going to hand this over back to Kathleen. But before that, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer on education or on studying in the US. And of course, we have Dr. Don Thomas here to talk about education as well. Okay. So I guess all of you are either still too stumped with all of that you've heard about space education. But I do hope that all your dreams come true and all your aspirations come true as well. So good luck. I'm going to wait for Kathleen to come over and take the stage. Oh, here you are.
Thank you, Maya. And again, to reiterate, our American Center here in Chennai is open Monday through Friday. Come back and visit us, and visit the offices of Education USA in person or contact them online with your questions following today's presentation. So, in July, in celebration of Apollo 11 moon landing and the successful launch of Chandrayaan-2, we launched our own poster competition soliciting your artistic renderings of what US and India space exploration looks like. Today it's my pleasure to first off announce the winners. We had two categories. Category 1, 16 and below. Category 2, 17 and above. And today joining us, I'm very delighted that our first place winner could join us. So before I announce their names, if Dr. Don Thomas, you could do the honors and stand forward here with me, and we'll present the certificates together. Excuse me. Okay. Do you actually want to read it? Sure.
All right, this is really exciting. I'm just gonna come right out of the way. And the winner for the 16 and below goes to Ravi Kumar. Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
First time I'm looking at it. Rocket Airlines, huh? Commercial. Excellent. Wow. That's beautiful.
You stand between us. Congratulations, Ravi. Thank you so much.
Okay. Second place is Alia, but she's not here.
We'll display our poster though.
And the third place is Melissa Catherine.
Thank you for participating.
All right. In the next category, which is 17 and above, the winner is Mohammed Rafiq. He's not present today, but we'll see his poster as well. Okay. Second is Akshaya Shashikumar, who's also not present today, but poster. Third place goes to Edith Maria Edwin, whose father is present today here.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. We also have a very special mention to one of our participants who's actually joining us live via Facebook, Raghavendran Vardarajan from Bengaluru. So I request Kathleen and Dr. Don Thomas to please stay standing. In just a moment, we are going to acknowledge our participants who submitted their entries for the poster contest. We really appreciate your creativity, your innovative ideas, and just participating itself. So a few of y'all are here today and have traveled from other cities as well to be here, and we'd like to acknowledge that. And as I call out your name, please come up and collect your certificate, followed by a photograph. Are we ready, Jimmy? Okay. All right. In the 16 and below category, we have Anirudh from MCTM Chidambaram International School. I don't believe he's here. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm only going to announce the names that are actually here. We have Uma Anand, who's here. Okay.
Is this Uma's?
Yeah, this is
Okay. We're going to move on to the 17 and above. We have Pooja Maran from Sri Shankaralal Sundarbai Shasan Jain College. Next up, R.V. Madhuri. Okay. Srihari Balaji.
Oh, nice questions today. Thank you.
So, as you said, like your biggest idol is Mr. Neil Armstrong. Same, it's me as well. So, Mr. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first to Mr. set foot on moon, and definitely Michael Collins as well, who was in the command module. That's a 1969 mission, and that's the 2019 mission to Chandrayaan 2 that will land. And then I hope it's me in 2029. All right, excellent. Yeah. I hope that
Very welcome. I know about proud mothers. My mother came to my launches and was the proudest mother always down there at the Kennedy Space Center. So. Good job. You should be very proud. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Good luck to you.
Okay, and last and definitely not the least, Shruti R. from Sri Shankaralal Sundarbai Shasan Jain College.
One more.
Okay.
Come on forward. Thank you. Oh,
Okay.
congratulations.
What's her name? Gayatri. Okay.
Make sure you get a certificate.
Just give me the name. Spell it. SHAWA. Okay. Okay then. Thank you. All right.
Okay. We have one more after this.
One more? Yeah, mine. Yeah. Shall we come here? Okay. Okay. Okay, done. I need one group picture and then we're done. Just everyone. Okay. All right. I think we're good. Can I just request everyone who got their certificates to just come up really quickly?
One more.
Okay, done.
We received a total of 66 posters from across South India. So we really appreciate everyone's participation, and especially those of you who made an effort to come here today to meet Dr. Thomas in person.
What's your name? Sonia Rams. Okay. My apologies. Kathleen?
Wonderful. Come and please step in. And your mother's. Yeah. Mother.
We're done. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Can I request all the participants and winners who have their certificates, please come up right now so we can take a quick group picture, please?
Ready, one, cheer up, smile please, smile please, look at me.
How about a thumbs up?
Thumbs up, look at me, cheer up, smile please. Thank you.
How about a round of applause for everybody?
Students, teachers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. As you make your way out,